Good day, everyone. It is a pleasure to me to introduce our esteemed speaker for today. He is the President for Retail and Chief Finance Officer of SEAOIL Philippines, Inc., the largest independent fuel retailer in the Philippines with 2018 revenue of close to $1 billion. Since taking over as CFO of the company in 2002, he was able to successfully navigate SEAOIL from insolvency to the most profitable player in the industry. Concurrently, he serves as president of Novel Finance Company Inc., a boutique investment and financing firm in Asia. More recently, he started QOPC, an innovative company that brings together his expertise in energy, finance, and technology. In the midst of the 2020 global pandemic, he launched Price Lock Q, a mobile application that allows consumers to buy and lock the price of fuel anytime, anywhere, and redeem later. Aside from his business pursuits, he is also actively involved in entrepreneurial and finance organizations. From 2013 to 2016, he was the finance director for Asia Pacific of Entrepreneurs Organization. It's a global organization of entrepreneurs with over 160 billion US dollars combined annual revenues. He also held the position of Southeast Asia Director from 2012 to 2013. He served as the past president and is a current board of advisor for CFA Philippines. He was also an advisory member to CFA Institute Global Marketing and Communications Committee and to the CFA Institute Vision 2012 Committee. Prior to assuming the role of CFO for SEAOIL, he was product marketing engineer for a Silicon Valley Nasdaq-listed semiconductor firm. He also founded and successfully sold an internet startup in Vancouver. He graduated with first-class standing from University of British Columbia with bachelor's degree in applied science, engineering, physics. He also completed an MBA course in technological entrepreneurship from the University of British Columbia, a master's course in electrical engineering from Georgia Institute of Technology, and the Chartered Financial Analyst program of CFA Institute. In 2012, he attended the executive program for growing companies at Stanford Graduate School of Business. More recently, he completed a course in machine learning from Stanford's online offering through Coursera. We have no other than Mark Liu, CFA.
Thank you, Alexa.
Thank you. Good day, sir.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
All right. Well, thank you for that long introduction. It just shows my age. I guess the older you are, the longer your CV becomes. I guess before we start, for those that are comfortable, it'd be great to see your faces. Always better speaking to an audience where you can see their faces versus just names, no? All right. Alexa, how do you want to go about this afternoon?
Well, I believe everyone is very excited to learn from this talk today, Sir Mark. Honestly, I will not prolong their waiting anymore. Can I already ask the first question?
Sure.
Okay, Sir Mark, we want to know, why did you pursue finance?
Based on your introduction, my undergrad was engineering, right? So I didn't really know much about finance at all. It was in my first job, I was given stock options, and I didn't know what stock options were then. And I was quite fascinated because the stock options that I got, within 6 months' time, the value rose to about $500,000. So imagine I was 22 years old. This is my first job. Within 6 months, I had stock options that were worth, 25 million pesos. So I was like, wow, what's this thing that can I guess grow that quickly, right? And as mentioned, I was in Silicon Valley, and after a year and a half, I noticed that stocks even went high, and then the market crashed. So from a peak of like $500,000, that whole thing vanished. And so interestingly, I was in an industry wherein it took you about 2 to 3 years of development before your product actually got rolled out. And I felt that was too long. I wanted to feel the impact of my work sooner than later. And so from there, I decided, this is, although I was good in what I did in terms of engineering, I said this seems to be more exciting. So I actually explored different curriculums, but I ended up deciding to take the CFA because I felt that was the most comprehensive of the different sort of courses that you can take and designations. So after, in 2002 is when I actually took level 1. And so no background in finance, everything was self-taught, but it was just fascinating because after that, staying 11 years in Canada, and in the US, I then moved back here and realized now that the company was in really bad shape. So it was a good thing that I took the CFA program because now at least I had the tools to be able to understand the financial situation of the company. And then from then on, I guess the rest is history. I was able to utilize a lot of what I learned. A lot of that, though, required me just being proactive in terms of meeting with people that knew a lot more than I did. And then that's really key. And I guess if there's anything that you take away from this first question, two things, right? Number one is if you guys want to be successful in life, there are two things that you need to be good. You need to first know your passion, right? You gotta be doing this without getting paid. Like, is this something that you like to think about outside of school? Or are you only taking this course because somebody told you to, right? And that's what you call passion, right? And creativity really comes from passion. And the next one is skill. In that regard, well, are you actually good at it? I mean, relative to the people around you, are you better than them or are they better than you, right? And it doesn't mean that if they're better than you now that you can't get better than them. It really will come from passion as well. So that's very important that the passion and skill has to intersect in order for you guys to be successful. And then I guess as mentioned, at the end of the day, I moved back here, and you gotta again love what you do in order for you to be successful. All right.
I see. Yeah. Going on, Sir Mark, what do you consider as the highest achievement in your career? In your career?
Highest achievement, and I guess that is the story. When I came back, in terms of us being insolvent, we had close to ₱1 billion in debt, and then the revenue was below that, and interest rate then was 3% per month, or 36% per annum. And so from there, our properties were being foreclosed. All of our properties were actually nakasangla sa bangko. And I had to do a lot of, I call that my original sin, because when I came back here, I had to deal with the banks and restructure with more than 10 banks. And some of them were easier to deal with than others. Yung mga iba talagang pinasa nilang sa legal. And I had to be quite creative in terms of how to raise capital without getting diluted. And at that time, it's a good thing the oil market deregulated. So we were able to open gas stations, and those naman were profitable. But the problem was, not only did we not have money, we had loans to pay. So there, I had to raise a lot of private capital. Kumbaga, kapal ng mukha na lang yun eh. You cold call friends and see if they're interested to invest, and you're basically staking reputation there, right? And then I also came up with franchising. So at that time, that's when we were able to expand quickly by franchising. When I came back, we had about 28 gasoline stations. Now we have over 500 gasoline stations. And for 2021, our target is to get to 700 gasoline stations. So from, I guess, inheriting loans to where we are now, wherein actually this year, even in the midst of the pandemic, compared to the other competitors, we're the most efficient and the most profitable company. Our competitors, actually the big ones, lost billions, no? 10 billion first half of the year. And I was able to, thankfully, another, plug for CFA, I was able to utilize well my learnings in terms of derivatives. So because of derivatives, we were able to properly manage the risk of oil prices going down significantly to protect the value of our inventory. So if any, it's really being able to turn around the company and I put here an end, allowing us to weather crisis, right? It's one thing to turn around a company, it's another to be able to weather crisis after crisis. That means you've actually built something strong, right? And in that regard, it's really about stability. And that's what I wanted to bring for our customers, for our employees. We have a significant obligation to our employees to make sure that we're able to continuously provide jobs for them as well. So a lot of what I have studied, I was able to apply. And that's a key thing as well, right? Look for opportunities to apply what you learn. All right. Sorry, am I frozen or are you? Is Alexa the one that's frozen? Oh, there you go. Go ahead, Alexa.
Okay, sorry for that. I totally agree with what you said, Sir Mark, being adaptable during crisis. And speaking of friends and connections, how do you relate your network and knowledge from CFA Institute membership or candidacy that have helped you?
The title brings a certain level of credibility. So definitely when you walk in a meeting with bankers and they see that you have that 3 letters after your name, then automatically there's a tendency for them to listen more to what you are actually trying to say. So definitely in that regard, it does help. In terms of network, it's a great community. I met Rob through CFA as well. It's a great exchange of ideas because the CFA network is quite broad in the sense that, it's not just, especially in the Philippines, right? Not just one area of expertise. Whereas overseas, primarily, siguro a lot of them are in portfolio management, right? Here, you meet with investment bankers, portfolio managers, treasury, trust, corporate finance. So again, in that regard, it's a great sort of network to be part of. And for me, I guess a part of me is also being an entrepreneur, right? And I guess the message there is really you need to know the story behind the numbers. So probably a lot of you have a background in accounting and probably taking finance courses as well. But at the end of the day, you have to know ano ba ang story niyan behind the numbers. And if there's really anything that I've learned, if you're going to be in the credit market, it's really all about character. So kailangan magaling kayo magbasa ng ugali ng tao, no? Because you're going to find it challenging to really make sense of the numbers sometimes because especially if they're SME, the books may not be, I guess, fully, compliant to the accounting standards in that regard, and you got to be able to look beyond the numbers.
Oh, I see. We're just curious. How were you able to achieve the role or career you have now?
Well, I guess for me, they also say I'm the COO. So, but I guess let me step back. There are several roles that I have. So under SEAOIL, COO means child of the owner. But you know, when I started off, it's not like my role was already there. When I started off, I had to do bank recon and really the nitty gritty, right? To really understand each element of my domain of exposure. For novel finance, how I started it was, as you recall, when I came back, I had to raise a lot of private funding to be able to finance us. But after several years, 5 to 6 years, we were able to stabilize the company and banks started to lend again to SEAOIL. And so all of these private investors were saying, oh, where else can I invest my money? And that is when I decided, you know, late in 2008, why don't I start a new company, right? And manage your money. So in that regard, it's one thing, it says career, right? But also at the right time, when you have enough experience and you can see sort of an advantage or a value proposition that's not being clearly addressed by the market, then you can start your own company. And so in that regard, yeah, Novel Finance, I started 2008. And then more recently, after we had actually divested 20% of the company to an Australian partner, I launched, and everything now is tech, right? So kanina, you were reading it, it's actually pronounced as LOCQ, L-O-C-Q, and it really brought together the intersection of what I keep on saying, right? My passion and my skill set. So I'm very passionate in those three fields of energy, finance, and tech, and brought them all together to come up with a company. And our first product is a mobile application that allows consumers not to buy fuel anytime, anywhere. Now, for those of you guys that are in finance, you know it's basically allowing consumers to hedge, right? Na lalo na ngayon, panay price increase, no? So with price lock, you can protect yourself from the price increases by buying now and then redeeming that at the future time. So how, in your case, okay, let me put it, if you're gonna have a career, my advice is the following. Position yourself to become indispensable in the company. And what do I mean by that? It means na pag may problema, you know, you should be there to be the ones providing the solution, right? If you can continuously position yourself as someone who provides solution, you're gonna progress well in your career, right? Mahirap kung ikaw yung nagbibigay ng problema. Kasi kung nagre-reporta ka sa boss mo and then puro problema ang binibigay mo sa kanya, eh bakit ka pa nandiyan, di ba? So you have to be the solution provider for your immediate superior in that regard. And also look for management training programs, and that is where I guess for us, we also have a management training program. What does that allow you to do? At the end of the day, to provide solutions, you need to have context. You need to understand what are the different trade-offs that you need to make. So exposure in the different facets of the business, marketing, you know, sales, accounting, finance, operations, will help you come up with a more informed solution. And in that regard, more buy-in from the rest of the organization, which would ultimately help you progress in your career. So those two things of having sort of broader knowledge through exposure in a management training program, as well as having a mindset of being a solution provider.
All right, we will take note of that, sir. Now, for the next question, how do you make career decisions in your life?
I will answer it the same way. You gotta love it, right? And you gotta be good at it. Obviously, finances, meaning compensation, factors in. In that regard, you know, you just really have to be able to look at the right companies to work for. There will be some certain sacrifices early on because the training that you will get is something that will ultimately benefit you in the future. Also, I would recommend that at least stay 3 years in one company, maybe longer, 5 years. Mahirap yung if you keep on moving from one company to another, you may not get enough experience, the right experience to be able to, really help you in your next step, right? I believe in that sort of rule of three. What do I mean by that? Normally, first year in anything, like for you guys, you go to college, right? You're just adjusting, right? You're trying to get to know the lay of the land, who's who, the teachers, etc. This the second year, you're just comfortable. Parang, okay, alam ko na kung anong patakaran dito, no? The third year is when you get the chance to excel. So also when you join a new company, similarly, first year parang, right, you're adjusting, maybe some shorter, some longer. But in that regard, 3 years is a good thing. And then, look for career progression. Parang with that cycle, you get promoted, and then there's a new set of responsibilities. Same, you need to adjust again, feel comfortable, and excel, right? So in that regard, parang have a good cadence, and be clear with ultimately going back what you love and what you're good at.
Very well then. How in terms of fashion and skills, what are the skills that we should develop as young professionals if we want to succeed like you?
I mean, there's such a broad range of skills, right?
Yeah.
So maybe we'll start with the major category, right? They say the hard skills and the soft skills. And the hard skills is really what you guys are learning now. So I'm just looking at the photos, and you guys look young, so I'm assuming most of you guys are in school. If there's quite a few here that are already working, then just raise your hand or put questions in the chat group if you want me to sort of tilt more of my responses for those that are already working. I can do that as well. But on the soft skill side is very important. As you progress along the corporate ladder, your ability to communicate becomes very important, because the issues as you progress the ladder doesn't become black and white, no? And your ability to distill the problem statement is going to be key. Now, I can answer that in many different ways. Siguro, we can talk about, maybe since this is a finance talk, the different fields in finance, right? If you're an investment banker, and it's more of a sales function, for example, right? So skill set there really is relationship building is going to be key. Your ability to sell an idea, right? Your ability to stay macro, right? Na parang, why would this deal make sense, right? Is there a set of competitive advantage, right? In that regard. So on the side of credit, as mentioned earlier, two things. You have to be quite analytical, right? The numbers that you're analyzing has to make sense. It's one thing what they tell you, it's another thing whether if you put them together, it actually makes sense. And it would be good if you can augment that with a wider network, which is a little bit harder. But normally, if you are working in a bank, in the loans department, you have the analyst and you have the relationship manager. And siguro yung relationship manager na kumukuha ng account, aside from the skill set of sales, yung kumbaga word on the street, you need to ask around, ano ba ang reputation na tong company na to, no? Now, if you're in treasury, now treasury, maraming ibang ano pa yan, no? There is the FX in treasury, there is managing government bonds, trading of that, derivatives and whatnot. Diyan, kailangan medyo malikot yung utak mo, no? very creative in the sense that you need to be able to spot the opportunities, right? So there, in terms of skill, ano lang yan, kumbaga, curiosity, always looking for opportunities to make money, because it's really about mispricing in terms of risk and return. There's also treasury sales, iba naman rin yun. But anything that has to do with sales, you have to be outgoing, right? Because some clients are, you know, if everything else equal, they give the business to the one that, you know, they get along with, right? So, yeah, so there are many. And then if you are in the stock market arena, there's also the traders and there's analysts. Now, as a trader, the skill set that you need to really be good at is information, collection of information, no? Yeah, because trading is really about that. The more information you have, the more informed you can be in terms of taking a position. In corporate finance, the skill set there is your ability to tie in the numbers to the business itself, meaning strategic, you know, sustainable competitive advantages. How are you able to, in business kasi, the way it works is this, you will spot a need in the market, and then, so that's a marketing hat, no? And then you have a theory as to how you can address that need. And then you will come up with a product, you're gonna test it. And then you're gonna test, after you test that, you're gonna see results. And then you're gonna tweak, and then you're gonna refine until it becomes really good. Now, as a person in finance, when you actually see the results, you need to be able to interpret it, right? And communicate it to marketing. Now, okay, this is actually what's happening. But you also need to know the context of what I guess the whole value proposition is. So the answer really is it depends, and I've already only limited sort of my response to jobs in the finance industry and sort of the required skill set. Now, there's one sort of test that I like, personality test, because it's really simple. I mean, there's many out there, and I suggest each of you take some sort of personality test, because there's some personalities that are more apt for certain positions in the industry. So you must have heard of Strength Finder. There's also the Myers-Briggs. What I like is a simple DISC test. That's DISC. And there, what do those letters mean? No? I'm actually putting it in the chat group. The D stands for dominant personality. Yung I is parang influence. You rely a lot on influence. S, steady. And then C, I believe, is like conscientious. How does each one apply? Normally, the more dominant personality are good in audit and control, right? Because you want to follow, this is the rule, you have to follow it, right? And you need to get people to comply, right? If you're more of the I type, you're more of the in sales, right? Because you gusto mo makuha yung loob ng tao, right? Not by force, but by influence, right? Steady and conscientious, if you're there, you're more, yung C, yung dapat correct yung ginagawa. So mga accounting, dapat high C ka dyan, no? Dahil, yeah, you want to make sure na, tama. Steady, you're loyal and harmonious. So in that regard, I mean, it's just a good quality to have, right? So all of these personality tests as well align with the job type that you are looking for.
What have you learned or you wish you'd known earlier in your career?
Oh, when I said earlier in terms of character check, I think yun talaga yung pinaka-ano ko eh. I relied too much on the numbers when I was evaluating investment opportunities. But when you're in a country where hindi ganun kala, again, accurate yung numero, and even so, even if it's accurate, at the end of the day, di ba, they say well, at least Warren Buffett, I've seen him give this in a talk, right? Integrity, intelligence, and drive. And what is the most important quality there, right? It really is integrity. Kasi pag matalino, if they're intelligent and driven and walang integrity, nako, patay ka. They're gonna run away with your money, right? And ang hirap ituro yan eh. I mean, do you have a course on spotting integrity or lack thereof in school, 101, or even in work, right? How do you spot someone who doesn't have much integrity, right? So I should have listened more to what other people. Normally, you talk to 4 or 5 people, and this is where, you know, I have some concerns with Facebook, and that's a different topic altogether. But what I do now is, if I'm gonna lend to somebody, I go to their Facebook profile, I look at who their friends are, and then, you know, I call them up. Some are acquaintances. Some kasi friends alone, you can already tell, di ba? You are, they say, the summation of the, or the average of the 5 closest friends that you have, right? So in that regard, I wish I had known that earlier. Another on the hard sciences naman is really, sometimes kasi nasisilaw tayo when we try and make investments, right? Even with the teachings now of CFA, iba pa rin yung when you look at an opportunity, the first question you'd have to ask beyond the numbers is, what is its sustainable competitive advantage, right? What does that mean? What does the word strategy actually mean? In war, which is where the word was initially used, your strategy means how you're gonna win the war, right? Ano bang plano mo? So in terms of sustainable competitive advantage, Warren Buffett talks about the moat. And kasi if they don't have a sustainable, and also where they're sustainable, no, competitive advantage, then they're continuously gonna erode market share. And eventually, whatever investment you make, mawawala, no? Liliit. And those you won't necessarily see in the numbers, in the financial statement. So what are examples of sustainable competitive advantage, right? I guess I'll just use our company in that regard. Why were we able to actually gain market share over those years? And simply, we were much better in terms of logistics. So what do I mean by that? We had actually built terminals in far-flung areas, and our competitors have refineries in Bataan and Batangas. So the freight from Singapore, and when you're a refinery, you're not just competing locally, you're competing regionally, right? The freight from Singapore to Mindanao is a lot cheaper than Bataan to Mindanao, right? So why is that? 2 things. One is the vessel that you use from Singapore to Mindanao is a lot bigger than the vessel that you use from Batangas, Bataan to Mindanao. So on a peso per liter, right away, we have an advantage. And so not until they actually also shut down the refinery, right, and have the same model, we'll continuously have that advantage. We're closest to the consumer because the last mile logistics cost is the most expensive. What do I mean by that? The truck freight from the terminal to the gas station is the most expensive leg on a per liter basis, on a per kilometer basis for the whole supply chain. And so in that regard, you know, it's a simple but yet effective competitive advantage that I can articulate, right? Sources of competitive advantage. In our case, as I mentioned earlier, because of the CFA education that I got, your ability to risk manage or manage risk well, right? So in that sense, being able to hedge. I know that our competitors, some of them, they don't do that here for various reasons. One is possibly lack of knowledge. The other is it's quite centralized to an offshore unit and it's not integrated. So in that regard, investing, you got to look at what is the competitive advantage and integrity. And I can give examples, no, of integrity issues. there are a few companies naman, this is me wearing my novel finance hat, no, which we are in lending, SEC registered lending. And, the numbers look great. And I remember making initial phone calls from, just people. And some won't outright say, don't do business with them. But you need to be able to hear sort of hesitancy in their voice na parang, they have concerns and we're not maybe close enough, so hindi niya sasabihin sa akin kung ano yun. And then it turns out, yung mga bad accounts that we have now are those na when I look back, when I did my background check, may mga, you can sense it na hindi pulido eh. So yung mga ganyan, you have to listen to your instinct. And I guess for me, maybe my learning there is also my ego na no, I can address that, no? Kaya kong gawan ng paraan yan. Yeah, so I guess mahaba yung mga sagot ko sa mga tanong mo, no?
Oh, that's okay, Sir Mark. Actually, we're learning from all your experiences.
Yeah.
What work do you do and how did the CFA program curriculum help you in your career?
Yeah, so since I've been talking about that, let's break down the CFA curriculum, right? Because if you guys are looking at that, you guys are probably learning it, right? You have there the accounting section. Now, in the accounting, and this is my advice to those who are in that field or intersect with it, there are accounting standards. And the reason also for the standards is to allow for, if there's a standard kasi, it's easier to communicate with one another, right? Because you understand what the basis is, right? But sometimes these standards are not necessarily the best way to account for performance that will actually allow you to know whether you're doing well or not. And this is another point I'd like to make, right? In our risk management, we have our management report, which is different than statutory reports because there are certain asymmetries in the accounting standards that are, for me, candidly, does not make sense. For example, when we do hedging for fuel, they only do mark-to-market on the derivative, but they don't do mark-to-market on the inventory. But the reason I entered that hedge to begin with was to protect that inventory. So if you're gonna value the movement in the derivative and you're not valuing the movement in the inventory, then hindi bangga. So it was hard to make sense of our financials when those two things were not being measured by the statutory standard. Yeah, you need to be quite, again, wear a different hat, right? Standards, there's a reason for standards, but it's not the end all and be all. And then you have statistics. Now, statistics is an interesting field because as it's more probabilities, right? The thing with that is you need to know, there are many types of things that occur in nature, right? And you need to know when to apply what type of statistical analysis. And they say there's a normal curve, right? And in terms of standard deviation, it only works if it's a normal curve. But what does that really mean, right? So in that regard, similar to my point earlier, what is sort of the background story behind a statistical tool? You need to be able to have more experience to know what tool really works well with what type of situation. And then you have your, I guess, debt, right? Debt instruments. And in debt, for me, what I really apply in terms of novel naman, two really concepts of duration, no? And liquidity there. I'm not sure if you guys have studied that. Basically, we are living in a time where valuation is tied to really interest rates. And valuation is really all about net present value of future earnings, right? When you think about it, because interest rates are so low, and kung gumalaw lang yan, I guess I'll give an example. Um, a movement of 1% when your interest rate is at 10 is only 10% of that 10%, right? If your interest rate's already at 2% and you bring it down to 1%, that 1% is 50% of 2%. It's a bigger impact relatively. And so in terms of valuation, as you approach zero, if your denominator is zero, and everyone would know this, what would be your, when you divide something by zero, what would be the output? It will be infinite. And so in that regard, the Fed or the central bank has a significant role to play with valuation and stock valuation, not only stocks, but also debt. And so in that regard, you really need to design your portfolio in a manner that you can respond well to interest rate movements. And so when they, in the term, I guess in finance, they call that duration management then. No? So what you need to be able to do is keep your duration short, but your yield high. When we say that, parang your exposure is, you know, let's say 1 year, 2 year, but you're able to somehow get 4 or 5% return, which is normally something you'd see in a longer sort of duration, no? Tenor. Liquidity is another thing, and they say liquidity is king, right? Even if you're profitable, but you don't have liquidity, patay ka rin. And in that regard, if you're gonna invest in assets, it's good to invest in assets that allow you to access liquidity. What do I mean by that? No, land. When you buy land, you can go to a bank and borrow against it, right? So you can get access to liquidity there. If you and then there's a ratio that is applied, right? If you invest in a phone, or ibang usapan yan, I may not even use the word invest because a phone depreciates, and so over time, you know, accessing liquidity there, you have to sell it. Mahirap naman sigurong pautangin. Hindi ko lang sino nagpapautang against a phone, no? And if so, meron siguro doon, pero ang taas ng interest rate. Then, so yeah, think about those two things when you're in looking at debt. When you're looking at equity, I guess I've talked about that earlier as well. What has not been covered as much is the sustainable competitive advantage, but equity similarly, you have to really watch out closely for interest rates. And then there's a section on alternative investments. So derivatives, for me, that is the most interesting and fun because there's a lot of opportunity there. A lot of people are scared of it. They call that the financial weapons of mass destruction. Yeah, there is significant, I would say, mispricing available in the derivative market, but it also really helps you manage your risk well. Ethics, I know there's a question on ethics, and there's a big part as well. You know, for me, ethics also tied to integrity. And at the end of the day, it's really simple, di ba? Do you want that other person to do that to you? So kung ayaw mong gagawin nila sa'yo yan, wag mo rin gawin sa kanila. So, I mean, there are more cases, but I mean, that one naman, you can look it up, right, in the actual curriculum itself. So for I guess every field in the curriculum, you know, depends on your exposure. Definitely, there's ways to utilize it. No?
Okay, what as a CFA, Sir Mark, why do you think the CFA exam is still relevant in the current country and global context?
I think it will always be relevant because they continuously upgrade naman and improve on the curriculum. And that's also the key thing, you know, in terms of continuous learning. Now, we are in a world where we have evolved from bartering. When you think about it, right? Before, wala namang pera. Okay, so nagkaroon ng pera. Why is there money? It's just a lot easier to transact with money, right? It's a store of value. I mean, kung walang pera and you were doing bartering, yung isa nagbebenta ng isda, yung isa accountant, pag hindi naman kailangan ng accounting nung nagbebenta ng isda, edi paano, di ba? So I guess now na-invent yung pera because of that reason then, no? Now, with that, you also have the concept of credit nga. Credit though, you know, I think we have abused credit in the sense na credit is really borrowing from the future, right? And we've borrowed so much from the future na what's going to happen, right, to the people there later on. Um, so as long as we have these concepts in our economy, right, the concept of money, not just concept, right, but the reality of money, the idea of debt, not only debt, right, the idea of selling a portion of the company's equity because you believe that you can do more with that money than the person investing. As long as you have all of these, then there's always going to be value in terms of finance. No? What it really does from a more metaphysical perspective or philosophical perspective is all these tools allow us to balance the, I would say, the past, the present, and the future. Na, look, if there's no ability to borrow money, then hindi ka makakabili ng bahay kaagad. And parang mabagal, di ba? Yung buhay natin na pwede ko naman bilhin na ngayon, utang ako, and then I promise to pay, right? But if you borrow too much naman, baka ma-foreclose rin yung biniling property. So I would say in that regard, finance has that role of borrowing from the future to today, because overall it creates a bigger pie for both the present and the future, right? It's about that balance. So it's quite fascinating, if you really think about it, that people over time have invented this tool to be able to allow you to have something now than later on, right?
Very well. For those that are aspiring to be CFA, could you give us an exam preparation advice based on your experience?
Oh, basta talagang put in the hours. I thought nga na they're exaggerating when they said 200 hours, no? But I realized na, at least for me, with no background at all when I first took it, I put in those hours, and then I was a bit overconfident going into level 2, so I put in less hours, and then level 3, I put back the same, more hours again there. And what else? When I took level 1, I went beyond what was just being taught. No, I actually dissected some of these formulas and tried to parang dissect it and put it back together for me to have a better understanding of what that really meant. So when you're taking the program, really great that if you can look for opportunities to apply. And there are a lot of parang out there na simulations. Like for example, currency trading, right? There are a lot of these websites that allow you, to open a demo account, and you'll get a better understanding of what that is. I'm sure in terms of equity as well, may mga ganun din. So if you don't have that exposure, yeah, try and get that exposure.
We would just want to go back when you discuss about ethics and integrity. What was the most confounding ethical situation you encountered in your career? Did CFA program help you navigate that? If so, how?
For me, what is really naman distinct is always insider trading. So in that regard, just applying the same thing, right? But insider trading here in the Philippines, di mo rin alam kung chismis lang o in talagang insider trading. So, kumbaga, yeah, for me, I just avoided it. And at the end of the day, I tried to focus on my sandbox. What am I, ano ba alam ko, di ba? What am I good at? Now, the other situations are not as much exposure. But I just try to keep it simple, right? At the end of the day, I believe in the concept of karma, the concept of, balance lang, no? Try and do good. I guess that's what I can say, no?
As we are about to end, do you have any parting words for those who want to be in the corporate finance?
Do I have any parting words? For me, I've found it really meaningful because I like to build things and not just sort of make money, right? I mean, there's many ways to make money, but in corporate finance, you're actually building something tangible, and hopefully you find meaning in that as well, and you're able to really contribute towards creating something that is, well, not to say that in other fields of finance it's not valued by consumers, right? It still is. But by definition, really, finance is an intermediary function that you're, yeah, I mean, a lot naman are intermediary functions in the sense that you're balancing supply and demand, right? Siguro, I'll end off with why launch Price Lock, right? And what our vision is. And through that blend of corporate finance and modern sort of financial risk management, my vision there really is to provide certainty amidst great uncertainty, right? The world we live in right now, there's so much uncertainties with the pandemic that's going on, right? And for me, we're not limiting this to fuel. We also can extend this to different commodities, insurance, etc. I want to be able to ensure that people are not worried about certain things, so you can focus on the more meaningful aspect of life. And that one, to each his own, right? Where you find meaning. And I don't want to limit it just to corporate finance. At the end of the day, I'm sure how many are in this, 77. Each of you have different set of interests, and you're probably intrigued about corporate finance. That's why you came in here today. Personally, that's the reason why. I mean, I can see myself also as in treasury, because I love structuring. I love finding opportunities there. I can see myself in investment banking. But at the end of the day, I like to build things. Have an idea, market it, pilot it, and see it come to fruition. So, with that, I really hope, the principle I've been talking about is the Hedgehog Principle. And it's really, it's a Venn diagram wherein the three circles are your passion, your skill, and the opportunity. And I'm hoping and praying that each of you can find the intersection of those three, because if you are able to do that, you will be successful and you'll be happy. And I think that's what's the most important naman. Yeah, so any questions? I think this ends at 6:30. I don't know if you, tama ba, 6:30? Or tapos na tayo, 6:15.
So thank you, Mr. Mark and Miss Alexa. That was a very knowledgeable discussion. We will now proceed on the Q&A session. So everyone, please write your comments or questions in the chat box if you have some.
Yeah, and I don't mind extending. I just hope that this is valuable for you guys. Yeah, and wag na kayong mahiya. Ayun nga ang ano ko, di ba? Sabi ko, if you wanna be successful, kailangan medyo may kapal na mukha. So who's gonna be bold enough to ask the first question, either live or in the chat group? Come on, guys. We can. Oh, there you go, Jezreel.
So we have from Jezreel Kaimor. She asked, how to take the CFA exam because I'm just curious how to fill up the form.
Just go to the website, CFA Institute. Sorry, I don't really know the steps now. It's been like almost 2 decades. So I'm sure Richelle can answer that. Great. Thank you for taking that courage to ask that question. So next one, scale of 1 to 10, gaano kahirap po yung exam? Just there's scholarship naman, so apply for scholarship if that's a concern. Just take it, right? And there's also mga practice test. So ang gaano kasi kahirap is relative eh. Others find it easy, others find it hard. At the end of the day, wala namang mawawala sa'yo kung itinry mo, di ba? So I suggest just try even the practice exams. No? And marami dyan and I'm sure CFA can also, Philippines can recommend which practice exams you can take. No? What certain area in corporate finance do you think needs more improvement or attention due to the effect of this pandemic? A lot of companies don't really know what they're making because they makes sense naman, they follow cash flow, right? But at the end of the day, cash flow is one thing, but you also need to know how much you're making. So in terms of corporate finance, that's one. There's a reason for all of those 3 types of statements, no? Income statement, balance sheet, and cash flow. And balance sheet's also very important. It tells you in terms of how much leverage you already have, and cash flow, of course. You could be profitable, pero puro receivables ka naman, patay ka rin, no? Due to the pandemic, the most what kills you is not losing money, it's lack of liquidity. So in terms of corporate finance, it's really for me, what I had made sure coming out of the 97 crisis was we're gonna have access to as many bank lines as we can. It doesn't mean we're gonna use it. So actually our utilization of bank lines is only at around 7%. The bankers won't be happy to hear that because we're not using their lines, no? Which means na in a time of crisis, kung nahirapan magbayad ang customer sa amin, we'll have access to that set of lines. So I would say during a crisis, the most important is access to liquidity. How do you handle stress of work, especially now that we are in a pandemic? Interesting, I guess. Stress naman for me, there's different types of stress. Siguro for me, outside of the pandemic, it really is yung mga bad loans na hindi makabayad, no? And I guess what I can just say is you always got to think of the future, not the past, because our present is a function of our past. Kung baga, nasaan ka ngayon, wala ka nang magagawa dahil consequence na yan, ano nang ginawa mo dati. What you can control is how you're going to act now moving forward, right? And in that regard, it's important that the decisions you make now are with respect to, well, what's better moving forward. And what do I mean by that, right? Sometimes kasi hindi na nga makabayad, galit na galit ka, stress ka, sige, you're gonna run after that, no? Wala pa rin pang bayad, so lalo ko pang gumastos, wala naman talaga makokolekta. And the learning there as well is, I should have done better risk management. And so I just try and reflect on, well, what could I have done better, right? And it's really learning the type of risk that you're taking. Don't take risk that can actually, kumbaga, make you fold, right? Dapat, ano lang yan, make you stronger, kumbaga. And I just try and really remove the emotional aspect of it. In that regard, I try to just look at one side of that emotion. No? I'm always hopeful. And why is there not to be hopeful? Parang we're living in this time na technology can really solve a lot of our problems. And you know, as long as you're with your family, that's there, then okay lang. I exercise every day as well. I think that's also good. It's a good way to release stress. So even if you're just in the house, there are a lot of these videos now that you can use and just exercise inside the house. No, so I recommend that. Next, can we take the CFA exam right after graduation? In fact, you can take it even before graduation. And a lot of people have done that. And the only thing is you cannot use a designation until you have relevant work experience. I'm not sure if it's still the case now that it's 4 years, or I guess what somebody said here 3. Oh, Rochelle already answered that. Okay, next one. What do you think is the most lucrative track in finance? iBanking, fund management, corporate finance. Okay, that's a great question. I would say most lucrative, but also the riskiest because it's feast or famine is investment banking. There, no. Fund management can also be quite lucrative. It depends on what type of fund management. And I guess mainly talking about a career as opposed to a business. Because with iBanking, there's significant bonuses depending on the amount of deals that you guys are able to complete. No? On the fund management side, you're primarily reliant on the management fees. So I guess depending on the bank now, and maybe Rob can be the one to talk more about this, what sort of incentives one has depending on the performance of the fund. But if you are actually starting your own business, fund management can be quite lucrative. I mean, in the sense that Warren Buffett, there's Li Lu, the guy in China, because you have profit sharing on in excess of a certain threshold. Corporate finance is probably quite steady, and well, it depends on the type of company also that you work with, right? With corporate finance, the interesting thing there is you get to interface with all types of bankers. Because in corporate finance, you can potentially deal with an investment banker if you want to raise equity or a different type of debt. You can deal with fund management for the pension. You can, you know, there's many aspects. So if you also want to just get an exposure to all of the different types of finance track, corporate finance is a good start, but you may not experience all of those if the company is small. Right? But if the company is big, you may need to work your way up the ladder before you can experience the different aspects or the different tracks in finance. But again, I will go back to, well, what is your passion and what is your skill, right? Because the most lucrative is if you're able to unlock those two, right? If you're good naman in all of those three, then umili ka na lang what has the most opportunity. Yeah. Thanks, Rod or Angelo. I'm not sure what you prefer to be called, but yeah. All right. Well, I hope
so I think